The Senate will come to order. I ask everyone to please rise and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In the absence of clergy, let us bow our heads in a moment of silent reflection or prayer. Reading of the journal.
In Senate, Monday, January 8, 2024, the Senate met pursuant to adjournment. Journal of Friday, January 5, 2024 was read and approved. On motion, the Senate adjourned.
Without objection, the journal stands approved as read. Presentation of petitions, message from the Assembly, messages from the Governor, reports of standing committees, reports of select committees, communications and reports from state officers, motions and resolutions. Senator Gianaris.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. I move to adopt the resolution calendar with the exception of Resolution 1595 and concurrent Resolution 1600.
All those in favor of adopting resolution calendar with the exception of Resolution 1595, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The resolution calendar is adopted. Senator Gianaris.
Can we begin by taking up Resolution 1595 by Senator Harkin? Read that resolution's title only and recognize Senator Harkin.
Secretary will read.
Senate Resolution 1595 by Senator Harkin, mourning the death of Thomas P. Diana, business owner, retired police officer, distinguished citizen, and devoted member of his community.
Senator Harkin.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's with sadness today that we mark the passing of Thomas P. Diana, supervisor of the town of Yorktown, who passed away suddenly on Friday, is being laid to rest as we speak right now. To his wife, Donna, his daughters, Megan and Brianna, our heartfelt condolences and prayers, and to all those who knew and loved Tom. Tom is known for several things. You know, he's a third-generation Yorktown resident. He was very proud that he was born and bred Yorktown, went to Lakeland High School, was a Westchester County cop early in his career, and was a beloved cop, and left a mark on him that later when he was on the town board, he spent a lot of time focused on substance use disorders and drug prevention toward our young people and recreation programs toward our young people. And when Tom retired from the county police force, he started a fuel oil delivery business in town. And again, people got to know Tom, and he was there for them on Sundays and holidays whenever they needed him. That was just the kind of guy he was. He was also known for his public involvement, many different civic groups. He was on the town board. And then when former Supervisor Slater was elected to the Assembly, Tom was appointed last year to be supervisor. And then in November, there was a contested election. Tom prevailed, and he was just sworn in last week for his first full term. And so, you know, this is one of those times where it's not about D or R, you know, this is about the humanity. And Tom was just a really, really nice guy. And the thing about him was he always had a smile. He always had a firm handshake. He looked you in the eye. He always gave you a bear hug. Great self-deprecating humor. You know, he's the kind of person you like to be around at events, you like to do business with. We work together. We were different sides of the aisle, but they're a big town in my district. We work closely together. And just a wonderful, wonderful human being. And so this is really just a tragedy all the way around. And so, again, our sentiments go out to his family, to all those who knew and loved him, those who served with him in Yorktown. I want to thank Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins and Senators Mayer, Bailey, and Fernandez for joining me on this resolution in his honor. Sadly, I vote aye, Mr. President.
The question is on the resolution. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The resolution is adopted. Senator Jean Harrison.
Mr. President, Senator Harkin would like to open that resolution for co-sponsorship.
The resolutions are open for co-sponsorship. Should you choose not to be a co-sponsor of the resolutions, please notify the desk. Senator Jean Harrison.
Mr. President, there is a concurrent resolution at the desk. I ask that that be read in its entirety and move for its immediate adoption.
The Secretary will read.
Senate Resolution 1600 by Senator Stewart Cousins, concurrent resolution of the Senate and Assembly providing for a joint assembly for the purpose of receiving a message from the governor. Resolved that the Senate and Assembly meet in joint assembly in the Assembly chamber at 1:00 p.m. today for the purpose of receiving a message from the governor.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? The resolution is adopted. Senator Jean Harrison.
Let's proceed with the reading of the calendar, please.
Secretary will read.
Calendar number 10, Senate Print 8001 by Senator Stewart Cousins, enactment of the village law and the executive law.
Leader Stewart Cousins to explain her vote.
So much, Mr. President. This is really the second half of a transformation in terms of the way villages are incorporated and the way villages can be dissolved. When I was the chair of local governments back in 2009, after the initiative of then Attorney General Andrew Cuomo, who looked at the 10,000 taxing entities in his role as Attorney General, and talked about how we could create a more streamlined government so there would not be 10,000 different ways to tax. And I was chair and was able to carry that bill that dissolved, that gave local people the opportunity to petition to dissolve various taxing entities. We as a government incentivized villages to look at the taxing entities and to begin a process to dissolve the escalator district, for example, to dissolve the goose dung district, to dissolve taxing entities that they really did not require. We never, however, looked at the law that is over 100 years old and how to incorporate a village. And there's a lot of conversation, and it's gone on in both houses and all around the state about what you do to incorporate a village. And so what I asked, rather than people deciding arbitrarily how to incorporate a village, I asked Pace University and the Elizabeth Howe School of Law to take a look nationally at what it takes in this day and age to incorporate a village. And they came up with a number of findings, most of which are in this commission. Basically, they said that a neutral state entity should preside over a village incorporation review process, that the decision-making for a village incorporation should rely on proper studies and analysis. Makes sense. I think it was Mastic Beach in Long Island that incorporated and then unincorporated because it turned out it cost a lot of money to run a village. And that conversation isn't really taking place in the process of incorporating. It also said that the minimum population requirements is inadequate. When you looked around the nation, Wisconsin, for example, requires 2,500 people to become a village. Florida requires 1,500. So our minimum of 500 is just too small. And subsequently and consequentially, because the number is too low, the number of signatures that you have to receive is also too low. So I really commend PACE and their Land Use Law Center, Dean Horace Anderson, and all who looked at the nation and looked at what our state was doing and made suggestions to, A, allow us to to have the information that's needed when a village is asking to become incorporated, and B, give people an opportunity, if they're going to do this, to actually be viable. So I appreciate the fact that people might be, it's different. I mean, again, we're changing a law that's well over 100 years old, but I do believe that it will help in terms of not only the viability of these villages, but there will be a rationale that is consistent with the country in terms of how these villages get incorporated. So I vote aye.
Recognize Senator Martins.
Thank you, Mr. President. I hate to disagree with my esteemed colleague, but I do. My history, as many in the chamber know, is in village government. I grew up in a village. I served as mayor of a village. I've been on executive boards for the Nassau County Village Officials Association and the New York Conference of Mayors before coming to this chamber. I represent nearly 50 villages in my Senate district, probably more than any other senator in this chamber. And frankly, with all due respect to whoever the consultant was at Pace University and whatever they do in the state of Wisconsin, I dare say we have villages in this state that actually are older than the state of Wisconsin in this country. There's a reason we have villages, and we have decentralized government in New York State, and we have home rule, and that allows local governments to make those decisions for themselves. I represent a series of villages, Mr. President, in my district, and I believe many of my colleagues in this chamber do as well, that have less than 2,000 residents and now less than 1,500 residents. But yet they're villages, they're successful, they govern, they provide basic resources, they provide zoning for their local communities, they budget, and yet we're telling them now that if they have less than 1,500 residents, somehow we're calling into question the viability of that village itself, and I think that's the wrong message. If a group of residents want to stand together and make a decision to form a village, whether it's a village or a town or a city, I think it is incumbent upon us to allow democracy to control and to allow that those things just happen. And the fact that we have laws on the books that are over 100 years old should be something we celebrate, not something that we use as a criticism and a measure to determine that they are, I've heard the term archaic, when we're talking about some of the basic foundations of governance here in New York State. So whether you live in a city, whether you live in a town, or whether you live in a village, you're going to live in one of those communities. And so to turn around and say the villages somehow are less because they don't have more than 1,500 residents, or we're going to cast aspersions on the intentions of people who want to form villages, I think is misstated. Mr. President, I vote no.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Addabbo, Gianaris, Kruger, Ort, Stewart Cousins, White.
Announce the results.
In relation to calendar 10, those senators voted in the negative are Senators Ashby, Borrello, Canzani, Fitzpatrick, Felder, Gallivan, Griffo, Hellman, Lanza, Martins, Oberacker, O'Mara, Ort, Rhodes, Rollison, Steck, Tedisco, Walzik, and Weber. Ayes 39, nays 18, excuse me.
Bills passed.
Calendar number 13, Senate Print 8004 by Senator Skoufis, an act to amend the insurance law.
Read the last section.
Section 3, this act shall take effect immediately.
Call the roll.
Addabbo, Gianaris, Kruger, Ort, Stewart Cousins, White.
Announce the results.
In relation to calendar 13, voted in the negative, Senator Felder. Ayes 56, nays 1.
Bills passed.
Calendar number 16, Senate Print 8007 by Senator Skoufis, an act to amend the village law.
Lay it aside. Move it laid aside.
Calendar number 17, Senate Print 8008 by Senator Hoyman Siegel, an act to amend the penal law.
Read the last section.
Section 46, this act shall take effect immediately.
Call the roll.
Addabbo, Gianaris, Kruger, Ort, Stewart Cousins, White.
Announce the results.
In relation to calendar 17, voted in the negative, Senator Brisport. Ayes 56. Also, Senator Salazar. Ayes 55, nays 2.
Bills passed.
Calendar number 20, Senate Print 8011 by Senator Kavanaugh, an act to amend the administrative code of the City of New York.
Read the last section.
Section 6 is action to take effect immediately.
Call the roll.
Addabbo, Giannaris Kruger, Ort, Stewart Cousins, White.
Announce the results.
Thank you, Mr. President. To explain my vote, we talk a lot about affordable housing, making housing more affordable in New York State, but this bill makes some marginal improvements, but it really increases the vagueness for our property owners here in New York State, and that's the problem with this bill. We are going to continue to push private property owners out of the business of renting their properties, and doing so is going to make us much like a third world nation, where the elite, the politically connected, have private property, and the rest of us are going to be in some kind of a government-run housing authority. And that is not the way New York State should look, so I'll be voting no. Thank you.
Senator Martins to explain his vote.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's, I guess, probably about 7 months ago, we debated this bill here on the floor. And here we are again. And I want to recognize that the chapter amendment does improve the original bill. It adds elements of knowingly committing a fraud, which is a vast improvement, provides critical elements of fraud, but continues to permit courts to dispense with other elements of common law fraud. This chapter amendment does not resolve the uncertainty of buildings that deregulated apartments pursuant to the interpretation of DHCR J51. Rather than providing clarity through this law and the chapter amendment, the reliability of the rent rolls of the affected buildings remain unsettled and subject to litigation, Mr. President. Part of the debate we had here just 7 months ago was precisely that. Vagueness, the applicability, retroactivity of some of these provisions, and the fact that it would not provide certainty to property owners when it came to holding them accountable or responsible for things that had already happened, which were perfectly legal when they happened. And unfortunately, this chapter amendment does not change that. So I'll still be voting no, although recognizing that this is an improvement over the original bill. Thank you.
Senator Martins is recorded in the negative. Senator Kavanaugh to explain his vote.
Thank you. I'll be brief. We did have an extensive discussion of this issue in June. And I just want to rise to, first of all, thank, we worked closely with the Governor's Office and our colleagues in the Assembly to clarify and address certain issues in the bill that we passed that are contained in this chapter amendment. This is the provisions that my colleague was referring to are really pretty straightforward. It is long settled in this state that if a case is brought for an overcharge, if there is evidence that the property owner has violated the law, is charging more than they can because of changes they willfully made, that they made under a standard that was called fraud for many years, that it is possible for the courts and HCR to look back and remedy that problem. It has never been the case in New York until one interpretation by one court recently that what is called common law fraud is necessary to be demonstrated. That was the case in the seminal case on this issue, on the issue of how the HSTPA of 2019 should be interpreted. That's Regina Metro, but it is really part of a long line of cases, including a case called Grimm and a case called Conason that established and repeatedly indicated that it is the court's interpretation of the law, that you don't need to demonstrate all of the elements of common law fraud. This amendment that we're here today clarifies that. It makes it clearer than the bill we were talking about in June, which also did that. And it is what we're doing today will indeed clarify the standards that people need to face. And if you willfully and intentionally raise the rent in a way that you were not permitted to do, and as a result, somebody is paying more than they're legally supposed to, this bill will provide some remedies for that. So I vote aye, and thank you.
Senator Kavanaugh be recorded in the affirmative. Announce the results.
In relation to calendar 20, those senators voted in the negative are Senators Ashby, Borrello, Castanet Fitzpatrick, Felder, Gallivan, Griffo, Helming, Lanza, Mannion, Martinez, Matera, Murray, Oberacker, O'Mara, Ort, Rhodes, Rollison, Scarcella Stanton, Skoufis, Steck, Tedisco, Walzek, Weber, and White. Ayes 37, ayes 24.
The bill is passed.
Calendar number 28, Senate Print 8025 by Senator Bailey, an act to amend the general business law.
Read the last section.
Section 3, this act shall take effect immediately.
Call the roll.
Adabo, Gianaris Kruger, Ort, Stewart Cousins, White.
Announce the results.
Ayes 61.
The bill is passed.
Calendar number 43, Senate Print 8053 by Senator Webb, an act to amend the vehicle and traffic law.
Read the last section.
Section 5, this act shall take effect immediately.
Call the roll.
Adabo, Gianaris Kruger, Ort, Stewart Cousins, White.
Senator Webb to explain her vote.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to rise to explain my vote. So when this was brought to the floor, and I want to thank everyone for their support, this legislation will allow for federally tax-exempt nonprofit vehicle companies with vehicle seating capacity of no more than 15 passengers, they're not limousines, to access automobile insurance coverage in New York State. This legislation is very helpful in areas such as mine, where a lot of folks still struggle with having access to public transportation. This particular organization, Ithaca Car Share, has been serving residents in my district in Tompkins County for well over 15 years, and they had to stop their operations because of a pre-existing provision in our state insurance law. And so because of this legislation, that organization will now be able to ensure that residents get opportunities to go to work, go to their medical appointments, engage in social activity, and so on. And so it really is not only an opportunity for equitable transportation, but also it's eco-friendly, especially for those individuals who also can't afford their own vehicle. And so again, I want to thank the governor's team, the Department of Financial Services, the Department of Motor Vehicles, and everyone that helped to make this legislation come to fruition, and to support the expansion of car shares across the state. And also want to thank my Assembly colleague who also supported this bill, Assemblymember Anna Callis. I vote aye and I encourage my colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
Senator Webb will be recorded in the affirmative. Announce the results.
In relation to calendar 43, voted in the negative, Senator Walzek. Ayes 60, nays 1.
Bills passed.
Calendar number 52, Senate Print 8065 by Senator Hinchy, an act to amend the tax law.
Read the last section.
Section 2, this act shall take effect on the same date and in the same manner as a chapter of the law of 2023.
Call the roll.
Adabo, Gianaris Kruger, Ort, Stewart Cousins, White.
Announce the results. Oh. Announce the results.
In relation to calendar 52, those senators voted in the negative are Senators Castanet Fitzpatrick, Harcum, Helming, Lanza, Mannion, Martinez, Matera, Murray, O'Mara, Ort, Rhodes, Scarcella Stanton, Skoufis, Tedisco, Thomas, Walzek, Webb, Weber, and White. Ayes 42, nays 19.
The bill is passed.
Calendar number 67, Senate Print 8087 by Senator Gurnardez, an act to amend the general business law.
Read the last section.
Section 8, this act shall take effect on the same date and in the same manner as a chapter of the law of 2023.
Call the roll.
Adabo, Gianaris Kruger, Ort, Stewart Cousins, White.
Announce the results.
Ayes 61.
Bills passed.
Calendar number 75, Senate Print 8096 by Senator Stavisky, an act to amend a chapter of the law 2023.
Read the last section.
Section 2, this act shall take effect immediately.
Call the roll.
Addabbo, Gianaris Kruger, Ort, Stewart-Cousins, White.
Announce the results.
In relation to calendar 75, those senators voting in the negative are Senators Borrello, Canzoni Fitzpatrick, Felder, Gallivan, Griffo, Lanza, Martinez, Matera, Murray, Oberacker, O'Mara, Ord, Rhodes, Steck, Tedisco, and Walzick. Ayes 45 and ayes 16.
Bills passed. Senator Gianaris, that completes the reading of today's calendar.
And we now move on to the controversial calendar.
Go to the controversial, all right. The Secretary will ring the bell. Will read.
Calendar number 16, Senate Print 8007 by Senator Skoufis, an act to amend the village law.
Senator Weber. Rise.
Yep, through you, Mr. President. Will the sponsor yield for some questions?
Yes, happy to.
Great, thank you. Senator Skoufis, when did you first introduce this bill?
Through you, Mr. President, I believe it was about 6 sessions ago that a version of this bill was first introduced.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. President, will the sponsor continue to yield?
Yes.
Great. And was this first introduced in response to Seven Springs Village in Orange County as being proposed?
Through you, Mr. President, like many of our legislative ideas, this one was, yes, in part prompted by something that was happening in the Senate district I represent.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. President, will the sponsor continue to yield?
Yes.
Mr. Sponsor, yield.
Thank you. You know, as you know, we have a lot of residents and common residents that live in Rockland and Orange that own properties in both, and you know, a lot of them have reached out to me with concerns with this law. You know, it's commonly referred to as the anti-Hasidic Jew village law right now in our area. You know, and I guess that was fueled by a lot of the comments that were made during the debate, throughout the debate, and since the law was passed. You know, comments like wealthy developers making a buck, Hasidic villages, things of the sort, not only in newspaper articles, but in posts on your Facebook and Senate page. So maybe I'd like you to speak to the fact of, you know, why those comments and why those interpretations, in your opinion, are wrong, and you know, how we can really make sure that these comments don't continue.
Through you, Mr. President, there are hundreds of villages, and thus there have been hundreds of village and corporation petitions over the years in New York State. And this bill and the underlying bill, which is now law, applies to all of them. And the vast majority of them, including an ongoing effort in Edgemont and Westchester, are not being initiated by developers. They're not being initiated by members of the Hasidic community. And as the majority leader noted when she spoke on her bill, the underlying law that's over 100 years old is antiquated and requires modernization. So this has nothing to do with religion, nothing to do with any of what you described, and I contend, through you, Mr. President, that if you have questions about the substance of this bill, I'm certainly happy to answer any of those questions.
Through you, Mr. President, will the sponsor continue to yield?
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
I
Sponsor
appreciate
yields.
that you brought up the village of Edgemont today, and that makes me feel a lot better, and I'm sure a lot of my constituents feel better. But when you had the chance to comment, you didn't mention Edgemont, you mentioned the Hasidic villages, or the Hasidic developers and Hasidic villages. So I appreciate you bringing that up now, but just one or two other questions. In terms of, villages, I live in a village. There's small villages in Rockland County. I believe the village of Hillburn has 900 people, and that's a village that has existed for a long time. If people want to form a village, right, what additional costs to the people outside those villages are there, and what concerns should we continue to have if people want to form a village? They enter into intermunicipal agreements with towns and the towns and the county. But if someone or a group of people want to form a village, what additional costs outside those people in that village are there?
Through you, Mr. President, I suspect my colleague knows that when a village incorporates, there are services that are absorbed by that village that were previously being offered by the town. And thus, a village might now be maintaining roads. And a village might now even have a new police department, specifically for the jurisdiction of that village. And thus, any services that are absorbed by the village, the existing service for the balance of the town, the unincorporated sections of the town, the costs are shouldered by fewer residents in that smaller now unincorporated piece of the town. And so all things else equal, yes, property taxes go up for the balance of those residents in the town when you don't have those village residents contributing to those same services that are in the town budget.
Right, and through you, Mr. President, would the sponsor continue to yield?
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Right, so
Sponsor
there's
yield.
shared services that are involved in that. But, it goes back to if people want to form a village, like villages were formed throughout the 19th century, 20th century, and most recently, if those people within that village are willing to pay that higher village tax, isn't it their right to form that village? And, as said earlier, there are villages that exist in New York State, one being the one I mentioned, Hillburn, that has less than 1,500 residents, and I think they're fine and dandy being the village of Hillburn as it exists today.
Through you, Mr. President, I think there was a question in the middle of that. And so when you asked, do folks have the right to form a village? The answer is yes. Nothing here takes away that right. We just simply modernize the parameters by which they have to meet new requirements to form a village. They can still form a village. We now have new population requirements. We now no longer allow property ownership, which is a vestige of near ancient history in New York State that discriminates against non-property owners. No longer can you petition through that method. We now have an independent commission that takes the politics out of the supervisor's office and into a more independent entity to determine whether a village incorporation is in the best interests of the local community. So no one's taking away this right. And I'll also contend to something that you mentioned before, and I may, pose the question to you as my colleague, that village incorporation efforts have increasingly, in recent years, been not about a group of residents who are earnestly trying to develop a village so that they can get better services and responsiveness from a more local government, but instead, the previous village incorporation law has been increasingly weaponized by developers in particular, and occasionally even residents, to either upzone or provide for exclusionary zoning. It actually works both ways. And I'm sure you're familiar with the incorporation of Airmont in Rockland County that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court determined that that village incorporation effort was to exclude Hasidic Jews from moving into that community. And so it works both ways. And, I'll just point out, or I'll ask the question if my colleague will defer, do you believe that village law and corporation efforts should be weaponized by a few, regardless of which side you're on? Or should we have rules in place that make sure that local communities are protected when incorporation efforts do proceed?
Sure. Through you, Mr. President, would the sponsor continue to yield? No,
Yeah.
I don't think that villages should weaponize it, and no, and I think there's a lot of reasons why villages are formed in the first place. But I'm glad you brought up Airmont because what I'm concerned about, and I think what a lot of people are concerned about, are the comments that were made before, during, and recently regarding this new law has poisoned the well and has set up potential lawsuits based on some of the very, very controversial, some of the dog whistling that has come out of this entire debate. So I remain concerned about that, but I thank you for indulging me with some of these questions. Appreciate it.
Are there any other senators wishing to be heard?
Thank you. On the bill, in keeping with my comments earlier having to do with a bill that would change the structure and how villages were formed and, again, set parameters, I'm concerned about, this top-down approach, this idea that somehow here in Albany we have a better sense of what people in local communities should or shouldn't decide to do. Now, I hear comments like disgruntled property owners. Mr. President, there's nothing more fundamental to our democracy than some disgruntled property owners deciding that they wanted a better form of government and that they wanted to self-govern. That goes to the very root of who we are as a nation, and certainly we have a rich history of that here in New York. Yet here in this chamber today, we talk about disgruntled property owners as if it's an aspersion, that property owners and residents should not be able to make those decisions for themselves. And we're going to make those decisions for them because somehow shared services in those communities may cost more, and those communities can't make those decisions for themselves, including, as was alluded to just a few moments ago, the fact that the supervisor of the town from which the group and community wishes to effectively remove themselves to create a village shouldn't have a say, because we're going to create a more centralized statewide commission that's going to make those decisions for them because they don't know enough on their own to make those decisions for themselves. I'm troubled by that, Mr. President, and I think everyone in this chamber should be troubled by comments and elitist comments like that say that because you live here in whatever community you happen to live in. Many of our members here in the chamber come from cities. They don't live in rural or suburban communities. They don't have experiences with villages, even villages smaller than 1,500 residents. I do. The ability of people to make decisions for themselves and to come together and to decide for their reasons they want to create self-governance in a form that makes sense for them is something that is central to who we are, as I said earlier, as a state, certainly as a country. I'm also concerned, Mr. President, that when someone has an issue in their local community, their fix isn't to address that issue specifically. It isn't to go into the community, in this case of Seven Springs, and to make the case for why Seven Springs should not create a village. My colleagues can certainly go into that particular area. It's in the process of debating this issue right now. They can go into Seven Springs and make the case for why that village should not be created. But no, instead, what we'll do here in this chamber is we'll bring an idea here to address a specific concern in Orange County and impose a one-size-fits-all approach that impacts each and every one of our districts wherever we happen to be. Because one member of this chamber did not want to go and deal with this issue locally, because it is a local issue. Now, every community in New York State is going to change the law and change the way the villages are created and undermine a process that goes back for well over 100 years. Not the first time that's happened in this chamber, and yet here we are again. So I ask my colleagues, think about your district. Think about the places you represent. Think about those communities that you represent. If you live in a city, think about the places that sometimes you drive to. Maybe you come out to Nassau County. Maybe you're back in my district. We have a lot of villages there. You know what? They're doing all right. Sometimes they just want to be left alone. And if they don't like the way the town is operating, and if they don't like the way that the local communities are treating a group of residents, isn't it fundamental that those groups should have the ability of deciding whether or not that they want to govern themselves? Is there anything more democratic than a group of residents deciding on self-governance? And yet this body would say, no, we know better than you. We're going to create a commission. We're going to put a floor to the number of people that you need to have. It's wrong, Mr. President. The other bill was wrong. This bill is wrong. The direction that we're going on as a state, attacking local governments for the sake of a more centralized government, is wrong. We're providing fewer and fewer options for our residents, and that's something each and every one of us in this chamber should be concerned about. Mr. President, I'll be voting no.
Any other senators wishing to be heard?
Thank you. So I don't live in a village. I live in a city. We all live in villages or towns or townships or cities and within counties. And guess what? All of us live in municipalities that under the New York State Constitution are the creation of the state. And we are all elected to try to make the best decisions we can for over 20 million people who live in all these municipalities in our state. And I have to support my colleague in this bill because we're not taking away the right to be a village. We're modernizing the rules of how you make changes in the law. We do that every day in this chamber. We're actually elected to do that. Democracy is not a stagnant, non-changing model. The world is changing every day, more and more rapidly. The issues we all are facing in our home communities are changing more and more rapidly every day. So the fact that two legislative bodies and a governor determined that this modernization made sense and was in the best interests of the people of New York, you can agree or you can disagree, but the concept that we are attacking some fundamental right that has existed and is not our business, this is exactly what we are elected to do, to try to make sure that New York State, within the confines of our Constitution, is handling things the best we can and recognizing that needs change, communities change, government changes, the world changes. We're just doing our jobs here. So I'm very happy to vote yes on this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. On the bill, in my time in county government, we actually had some villages dissolve in my district when I was a county legislator and as county executive. And the state gave tools to the folks in that area to dissolve a village if they chose to do so. They didn't demand it. They didn't change the thresholds. They didn't change the circumstances. And some folks chose to vote and dissolve villages to save money. Now, I've heard in this debate that we are modernizing things from 100 years ago. Well, if you look at the most recent history of the incorporation of new villages, it's almost exclusively those who are wishing to organize into a Jewish community, almost exclusively in new village incorporations. So the appearance is that after 100 years, all of a sudden recently, well, we're going to change some things. Raise the bar a little bit, make it a little bit more difficult. That may or may not be the intention, but it certainly is the appearance. Because at the same time, we've been attacking those folks that want to have their own religious schools, private schools. We've attacked them, made it more difficult. Again, what's the appearance of that? So we can argue all we want that this is just a change that we needed all of a sudden after 100 years, or we can look at the facts that the most recent villages incorporated are in fact those organizing under the Jewish faith. That's the appearance that we're giving here, making this change now. In a particular area, by the way, where we've had those villages incorporated, so people can live together with a common goal, common interests. That, to me, is disturbing. I'll be voting no.
Mr. President, on the bill, as a former deputy mayor in the village of Malvern that was formed in 1921, I've had the benefit of seeing how village government runs. It's the most efficient form of governing. Politics of Republican versus Democrat goes out the window. It's about doing what's best for your local community. And those decisions are particular to local communities. A one-size-fits-all at the state level does not work. In many districts, I would never come into another district and say what should work, because even within the 9th Senate District, there are so many different areas, and what might work on the South Shore doesn't work up in Belrose Village, who incorporated 100 years ago. Having property owners gather together and decide to form a village 100 years ago is a basic principle that we shouldn't overturn at this point. And I do have some very serious concerns about what we're doing by removing decisions from local communities that know what's best for them. So for those reasons, I'll be voting in the negative. Thank you.
Balzic.
Thank you, Mr. President, on the bill. So we've received some civics lessons, and I just want to correct the record on some things. We are 19 million and reducing in number in New York State, not 20 million anymore. Sadly, we continue to lose population. This may be one of the reasons why. We are also not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic, and everybody in this chamber knows that because you just put your right hand over your heart and swore pledge allegiance to the republic for which it stands, right to that flag of the United States of America there. If we were a direct democracy, people would be voting on Senator Skoufis's bill S-8007, but instead, we're a constitutional republic where the people have selected each member in this body to discuss and debate these things under the understanding that on your very first day of office, you swore an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States and that republic. So you can't just toss out the principles and say, oh, these laws are old, and that means we need to update them so that we can become more autocratic, control more things from the top, push more power towards the executive, and disallow people to even form their own villages in the state of New York. A government closer to the people serves them better, and I will point you all, because my time is short in this chamber, so I appreciate the opportunity to speak, Mr. President, but I would point you all to one other symbol that you get to reflect on and look at each day that you're in this chamber. It's both on the New York State flag and on the seal that sits above the dais there in the window. When New York State formed the seal for the state of New York, they put the crown of King George III under the foot of Lady Liberty. In the design of the flag and of our seal, they call it kicking the crown. Because our job here is not to consolidate power to the state away from the people. Our job is to remember that New York State kicked the crown of an autocratic king because government closer to the people serves the people better and to the republic for which it stands. Thank you, Mr. President. I vote no.
Senator Skoufis.
Thank you very much. On the bill, I appreciate the dialogue and the debate. I do want to correct a few things for the record. At least a couple of my colleagues, including the two from Long Island, spoke about, or they suggested, how this bill, this new law, somehow removes local decision-making authority. As my colleagues likely know, but perhaps not, the town supervisor, under the previous law that was in place for about 150 years, the town supervisor could not consider the merits of the incorporation. They could not consider the impacts on local taxes. They could not consider the impacts on local services of the incorporation. None of that could be considered when the town supervisor sought to approve or reject a village incorporation petition. None of that could be considered under the previous law. There was no decision-making authority to remove. The only thing that the town supervisor could consider was the superficial aspects, the technical nature of the petition. Are the tax lots outlined legally and appropriately on the petition and the such? And so the suggestion that there was any local decision-making authority by the town supervisor to begin with is just simply patently false. It was mentioned that we're creating a floor here. There's been a floor for 150 years of 500 people. We're not creating a new floor. We're raising the floor, the number of people, but there's always been a floor in place. I suppose the logical conclusion of that argument would be that there should be no floor. One person could create a village, perhaps, is a suggestion. 500 people 150 years ago, it's very different than 500 people in the year 2023, regardless of outmigration or not. In 1870, when this law was originally enacted, there were 4.5 million people in New York State. 500 people, it's very different in 1870 than it is in 2024 in a state of 19 million people. So yes, it's high time that we updated this absolutely antiquated law, and I appreciate the opportunity to correct some of the statements that were made earlier. Thank you, Mr. President.
Minister Vitsky.
Thank you, Mr. President. Very briefly, let me remind my colleagues that we are a representative democracy where people elect us to do things that they cannot do for themselves. And in fact, we even accept the results of these elections, and we do the best we can. I live right now in Whitestone, in Queens, and prior to 1898, Whitestone was a village in the town of Flushing. And yet in 1898, there was a referendum, and the people in this section of Northeast Queens voted against it. But nevertheless, there was the consolidation of various towns and villages in 1898, 125 or so years ago. We accepted the results, and we are proud to be part of the city of New York. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. On the bill. So the bill sponsor is correct in the process. I think it's worth pointing that out. As a longtime town supervisor in Warren County, I presided over the attempt to create a village in my town. Actually, it straddled the towns of Queensbury and Fort Anne in Warren and Washington County on the shores of Lake George. The name of the village would have been the Village of East Lake George. I don't think there was a religious component there as much as it was shoreline property taxpayers not liking how much of the local tax burden they were paying for. And I sat through, and it took them 3 attempts to get the petition correct, because the 2 town supervisors that presided over this process, as pointed out, collect a $6,000 check, go over the map, make sure that all the I's are dotted, T's are crossed. Big discussion over how to conduct this election, ballot box in the fire hall, paper ballots, because these kinds of elections don't happen all the time. And it frustrated me as a town supervisor seeing this and listening to the debate as to what this was going to mean to the town's finances, to the potential village's finances, who's going to make out or not make out and the wisdom behind the money. I understood the law was that the assessed value in the town for all town purposes still wasn't going to change. You could hire your own assessor to do the village taxes, and that would only apply to the village taxes. And at the end of the day, you were creating another layer of government, and it was going to cost everybody more money. The wisdom of the decision said this did not make sense, that this was a bad idea to create the village. But that was not the question in front of the town supervisor. And as the town supervisor, it was frustrating to me because I knew the right answer. But that's not the point. The point is that the voters are the ones that we could all decide, well, this person should be the governor, this person should be the president, this is how it should work. At the end of the day, though, in a republic, the voters have the say. And guess what? The voters are smarter than I think a lot of us give them credit for sometimes. And the voters in this case, when they finally got the petition right on the third attempt, it's still a funny story to me how difficult it was for them to get the petition right, the voters rejected the formation of the village overwhelmingly. I think it was 2-1 in both municipalities, both towns. So the village, potential village people figured out amongst themselves, this is a bad idea. And they made the decision. It was their decision, not mine to make. So again, the sponsor's 100% right that it isn't up to the town supervisor to rule on this. It is a matter for the people in the village to have that vote. And I think that that's the important message here, and we shouldn't be trying to make it more difficult for locals to make these decisions. Thank you.
Mr. President, on the bill, I appreciate the sponsors doing his job. As legislators, we are supposed to be proactive as opposed to reactive and forward-looking as opposed to retrospective. Many of the discussions that are heard in relation to this hints of constitutional originalism. It seems as if there was a time with the intent of the framers that a lot of people in this room could not vote, could not own property, could not do a number of different things if we were strictly to adhere to the Constitution in its original form. I believe that the Constitution is a living document, and that as we change times, we either should change with the times or be changed by them. I also believe that if we are constitutional originalists, if those who are constitutional originalists should support the 14th Amendment, Section 3. Thank you, Mr. President.
Are there any other senators wishing to be heard? Seeing and hearing none, debate is closed. The secretary will ring the bell. Read the last section.
Section 8, this act will take effect immediately.
Call the roll.
Addabbo, Gianaris Kruger, Ort, Sewell Cousins, White.
Announce the results. Senator Mayer to explain her vote.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciated the conversation on this bill, but as the chair of the Education Committee, I did want to correct some information that I thought was inaccurate during the conversation by my colleagues. This conference, in fact, on a bipartisan basis, has gone way as far as it can and will continue to be incredibly supportive of non-public schools, particularly religious schools, both of our Jewish, Muslim, and Catholic partners, because we support parents choosing how they educate their children. And just to remind my colleagues, we've substantially increased the amount of STEM funding for non-public schools to benefit many of our religious schools, which could not afford expensive teachers in science, technology, engineering, and math. In addition, this year, with the majority leader support, we worked with the governor's office to expedite security funds going out the door more quickly, particularly at the behest of our Jewish day schools, which were spending a significant amount of money for overtime costs as a result of tensions surrounding the Israel-Hamas war. So we will continue to be the strongest advocates for non-public, particularly religious schools, Jewish, Muslim, Catholic, and every other faith, And the insinuation that we have left them behind is simply inaccurate. I vote yes.
Delamere will be recorded in the affirmative. Announce the results.
In relation to calendar 16, those senators voted in the negative are Senators Ashby, Borrello, Canzone Fitzpatrick, Felder, Gallivan, Griffo, Hellman, Lanza, Martins, Matera, Murray, Oberacker, O'Mara, Ort, Palumbo, Rhodes, Rollison, Steck, Tedisco, Walzick, Weber, and White. Ayes 40, nays 22.
The bill is passed. Senator Janeris, that completes the reading of the controversial calendar.
Mr. President, is there any further business at the desk?
There is no further business at the desk.
Move to adjourn until Tuesday, January 16th at 3 p.m. with the intervening days being legislative days.
On motion, the Senate stands Tuesday, January 16th at 3 p.m. with the intervening days being legislative days.